Imagine standing on the frozen banks of a river, watching your father dragged under the icy water, knowing there is no one to stop it. The people doing this, your neighbors, your countrymen, men who spoke your language, prayed in the same churches, served the same crown, were not invaders. They were instruments of your own ruler's wrath. And when the screams of women and children are silenced, when entire families vanish beneath the ice, the question arises: what happens when a ruler decides that his own people are the enemy, not an opposing army, not a foreign kingdom, but the very cities, the merchants, the clergy, the families under his protection? This is not a story of battlefield conquest. This is a story of fear, power, and the machinery of death that can be unleashed when absolute authority meets paranoia. And the stage for this terror was set in the winter of 1569, when Tsar Ivan IV, known to history as Ivan the Terrible, began a march that would leave entire towns erased, leaving nothing but silence and ash in his wake. The winter of 1569 was merciless, and so was Ivan. He assembled 6,000 men, his personal enforcers, the Oprichniki, and began a slow, deliberate march north toward Novgorod. Every town along the way would learn what it meant to defy or even appear to defy the Tsar. In Clint, the first stop, they killed indiscriminately. Men, women, and children fell without accusation, without trial. The point was not vengeance, it was a message. Every body left behind, every home set ablaze, was a signal to the next town. Fear is the law now, and Ivan's will is absolute. In Tafer, the destruction intensified. Monasteries were desecrated, clergy executed, treasures stolen, ancient icons, manuscripts, sacred vessels taken not to preserve, but to display the reach of Ivan's authority. Thousands died in days, their deaths recorded by observers who could barely comprehend the scale. Granaries were emptied, wells poisoned, livestock slaughtered, leaving nothing to sustain the people through the unforgiving winter. The Oprichniki moved with surgical precision, turning the landscape into a warning. By the time the column neared Novgorod, rumors of carnage had already spread. Survivors, refugees, travelers, they told of burning towns, of bodies left in streets, of children clinging to mothers in vain. There was nowhere to flee, no ally to call upon. Novgorod, a city that had once prided itself on self-governance, on trade, on independence, now faced a threat from within, a government turned weapon against its own citizens. The city that remembered freedom would soon witness its erasure. To understand the why, one must understand Ivan himself. Born in 1530, he became Grand Prince at age 3 after his father's death. His mother ruled briefly as regent before her own death when Ivan was just 8, leaving him in the hands of Moscow's feudal nobility. They treated the throne as a toy, a piece of furniture to be fought over, and young Ivan learned early that survival required both cunning and ruthlessness. He grew up with fear, hunger, and humiliation, watching the powerful treat him as expendable. By 13, he had tested that lesson, ordering the arrest of Prince Andrei Shwisky, sending a clear signal: even the strongest could fall at his command. At 16, Ivan's coronation as Tsar established not just his rule, but divine authority. No longer was he a prince who governed by the approval of others. His word was law, sanctioned by heaven itself. For over a decade, he ruled with stability, reforming laws, conquering territories, and opening trade with distant nations. Yet beneath the veneer of progress lay a mind hardened by betrayal and loss, illness, hesitant allies, and the mysterious death of his first wife, Anastasia, cracked his perception of loyalty. When he believed she had been poisoned, whether true or imagined, the seeds of distrust and vengeance took root. By 1564, the shift was undeniable. Ivan staged a political maneuver unprecedented in Russian history. He left Moscow, taking his treasury and loyal followers, while sending letters to nobles and commoners alike. framing the disloyalty of the boyars as the cause of his temporary abdication. The population rallied. The boyars had no choice but to comply. Ivan returned, but under one condition: absolute power to punish treason without review, without appeal. From that moment, the machinery of the Oprichniki would become the instrument of state terror, sweeping away entire families, seizing wealth, and enforcing obedience across his chosen territories. Ivan divided his realm into two: the Zemchina, ruled under traditional laws and the old nobility, and the Oprichnina, his personal territory, governed by a single rule, his own. Within this domain, the Oprichniki operated like an army and a cult combined. Drawn from men without independent power, their loyalty depended entirely on the Tsar. Dressed in black, mounted on black horses, they carried symbols of death and purification: a severed dog's head to sniff out treason, a broom to sweep it away. They lived together in monastic compounds, following schedules of prayer and communal meals, only to spend their days executing the will of the Tsar. Treason became a sin, obedience a form of worship. The Oprichniki could arrest, interrogate, confiscate, and execute anyone without question, without appeal. They dismantled the power of dozens of noble families, erased entire households, and reduced once proud aristocrats to submission. The lessons Ivan had learned as a child: betrayal, humiliation, survival through fear, had matured into a systematized, merciless mechanism of control. And then, Ivan turned his attention north. Novgorod, a city unlike any other, had a legacy of independence. For centuries, it had operated as a republic, its prince elected, its assembly the Vez, holding real power. Merchants, not military lords, governed the wealth and influence of the city, stretching trade networks from the Baltic to Central Asia. Though conquered in 1478 by Ivan's grandfather, the city had retained its identity. Its citizens remembered freedom, and Ivan knew it. Whether the reports he received of a Novgorodian conspiracy were true mattered little. The existence of a document was justification enough. Once he had that, the Oprichniki would follow a logic all their own. The march began in December 1569. From Moscow, the column moved deliberately, large enough to be seen from a distance. Clint became the grim prototype. Indiscriminate killings, property seized, structures burned. Tayfair escalated, the terror monasteries desecrated, clergy executed, treasures plundered, thousands slaughtered, food stores destroyed, livestock driven off, wells poisoned. Every action had a purpose: to terrify, to warn, to ensure that when Novgorod faced the Oprichniki, resistance would be unthinkable. By the time Novgorod's outskirts were reached, the city's residents knew what awaited them. Refugees and survivors had spread the tales of death and destruction, leaving no illusions. When the Oprichniki sealed the city on January 2nd, 1570, guards at every gate ensured no one escaped. For 4 days, they built lists, confiscated weapons, and identified the city's wealthiest, most influential citizens. On January 6th, Ivan entered the city himself, confronting Archbishop Pimen, calling him a wolf, stripping him of his vestments, and demonstrating that the sacred offered no protection. From that moment, the operation became mechanical, ritualistic, and chilling. Tribunals were formed, suspects accused of conspiracy, interrogated in groups, their fates predetermined. Families were bound together, tied to one another, and pushed into the freezing Vulov River. Those who surfaced were beaten back under with poles, hooks, and axes. Monasteries and warehouses were emptied, icons stripped, treasures seized. Ordinary merchants, influential families, anyone connected to the accused, all were targeted. Each act served not only as punishment, but as instruction. Survival depended on total obedience. The executions at the Vulov River became a daily ritual, a terrifying demonstration of power that lasted for 5 long weeks. Each day, the Oprichniki swept through Novgorod, dragging people from their homes, parading them through mock tribunals, and consigning them to the icy water. The initial focus was on clergy and nobles, then wealthy merchants, then ordinary citizens whose only connection to the accused was proximity. Some were burned alive, others beaten into submission before being thrown into the river. The scale of the operation was unprecedented, systematic, and terrifyingly precise. Meanwhile, the city's commercial backbone was destroyed, warehouses emptied, marketplaces stripped bare, and trade goods seized or burned. Novgorod's intricate web of international connections to Baltic merchants, Hanseatic traders, and Central European markets was severed in a matter of weeks. These were not collateral damages. They were deliberate acts designed to dismantle the city's economic power, to ensure that even if lives were spared, the city could no longer function as a commercial hub. The consequences would ripple outward. Starvation followed in the wake of destroyed granaries, spreading across neighboring towns, compounding death through famine and disease. By February 12th, Ivan departed. He addressed the survivors, instructing them to live in peace, to pray for his reign, and to acknowledge his authority. Behind him lay a city stripped of leadership, wealth, and life. Novgorod, once a proud republic, had been transformed into a provincial shadow of its former self, its population decimated, its trade networks destroyed, its institutions dismantled, and its identity erased. The chronicles vary on the death toll. Modern estimates suggest 2,000 to 3,000, while contemporary accounts, including survivor records, hint at tens of thousands, likely including deaths from famine and disease following the massacre. The aftermath was slow, insidious. Novgorod never regained its former independence or prominence. The Oprichniki themselves, a force built for internal terror, were incapable of defending Moscow against external threats. In 1571, when Crimean Tatars under Devlet Gira attacked, Moscow burned, and the Oprichniki proved useless on a battlefield. By 1572, Ivan disbanded the Oprichnina and banned its name. Yet the damage it had wrought, the destruction of nobility, the disruption of trade, the dismantling of institutions persisted. When Ivan died in 1584, he left a paradoxical legacy. On one hand, Russia was more centralized than ever, a state of absolute authority under the Tsar. On the other, it was economically weakened, politically fractured, and demographically scarred. Within 2 decades, the country would descend into the time of troubles, a 15-year period of civil war, famine, foreign invasion, and chaos that killed roughly a third of the population. The seeds of that crisis were sown during the winter march to Novgorod, during the calculated terror, during the machinery of death that Ivan had perfected. History remembers massacres, but rarely the method behind them, the chilling precision that converts suspicion into policy and cities into hushed monuments to fear. Novgorod stands as both warning and testament, a city that taught the world what happens when absolute power meets absolute paranoia.